Welcome to Have You Seen This? The podcast about obscure, overlooked, and misbegotten cinema. All discussions will be spoiler heavy. You have been warned.
Welcome to Have You Seen This? I'm Jennifer Albright.
And I'm Tim Heidrich.
Tonight, our guest is a returning customer. He plays the befuddled dad to several large sons on the beloved sitcom Chapo Trap House. It's Will Menaker. How's it going, Will?
Hello, have you seen this? I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be back with you, Jennifer, and with Tim for the first time. Hello.
Yeah, this is a new one.
Yes, today is the beard cast.
Yeah.
So we got a magnificent pair here. I'm still growing mine.
Well, you got a little bit of a mustache.
I mean, it's patchy, but, like, I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
You know, it's like high school all over again. So, tonight, as you recall, last time Will was on, we discussed Scorsese. We're going to be talking about another great director of the 70s, my man, Wide Dick Willie Friedkin. And we will be discussing one of my favorite films from the man himself, Cruising.
And I think there's a whole sub-community that's a real fan of Cruising.
Yeah, they like to wear similar uniforms or something.
Oh, police.
It's like one of those movies like The Big Lebowski or Rocky Horror Picture where you really got to dress up to fully enjoy it in the theater with all your friends and all your bros. This is a movie that you should definitely see with your bros.
Yeah, so strap on your harness and enjoy.
Yeah, strap on and strap in.
No, strap into the harness. If you're strapping on the harness, you'd be the completely wrong audience for this film.
Oh, that's true, yes.
Yeah, grease up your fist and dive on in.
Get your can of Crisco. Because we're just going to slide right into it.
You may not think all three of us could fit in this movie, but we're going to make it work.
Well, as long as none of us is a cop.
Right.
Are you a cop?
Well, I have been accused of it in the past. I'm not saying.
Yeah.
I'll keep mum on that.
Oh, that's true. But I should point
I
out
won't blow my cover.
We all have queer bona fides because I am bisexual,
Mm-hmm.
Tim is a sapiosexual, and Will lives in a Park Slope mansion with several men. Will, can you give us a little TV guide synopsis of Cruising?
Okay, Cruising was made in 1980, and this was like the director William Friedkin's sort of return to gritty New York crime after the French Connection. This was his return to New York, and it was based on a novel, I think, from the 60s by Gerald Walker, I think was the author. But this is a movie that was completely reviled upon its initial release, almost wasn't released. It became incredibly controversial even before it hit theaters because I think a gay newspaper in New York, or like I think The Advocate, or got a copy of the script and read it and called for boycotts of the movie. It was a movie that was basically like the movie is about a killer is killing gay men in New York City in the 80s, and it's about how Al Pacino has to go undercover into this like gay subculture of S&M, hellbent for leather, underground sex clubs. And it is, even by today's standards, a extremely explicit movie in its depiction of gay sex and this particular gay like leather subculture. And it was, lambasted as just being like disgusting and awful and incredibly homophobic when it came out, so much so that I think Al Pacino to this day will not even discuss the movie if asked. I think they just the studio just locked it in a vault or something before many, many years later getting, I think, a re-release of some kind or a second look. But it was a movie that was just too much for the time it came out.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because I personally adore its frankness about a subculture of queerness. And I was wondering what you guys think about those allegations that were made against it.
I think that people are reacting to it thinking that it's just more of the same, whereas I would posit that there's no purpose in making a movie that tells people what they already know. you need to kind of like have a twist on it, or some other opinion on what's going on with sort of gay culture and the wider culture's reaction to it, because you can't just have a movie that's echoing the same sentiments of saying like this freaky gay culture is really weird and I'm uncomfortable because of it. There's no artistic merit in making a movie that's just going to echo what other people's sentiments are. Like, you have to go beyond that, and I think that that's what people were reacting to, because they were thinking that it's just more of the same.
I would say that watching it again, it's certainly, I would say it's not homophobic, but like it's, as time has passed, it doesn't strictly live up to the controversy of it. That being said, it is a movie that goes to incredibly explicit lengths to, I think, really rub its audience's nose in like the absolutely like most like seediest and like most extreme parts of pre-AIDS New York City gay subculture. And the way it's depicted is, as you said, like incredibly frank and explicit, but also I think Friedkin does it in a way that it's very dark and seedy and nasty in a lot of ways. But even though it may perhaps have been more accurate than any other mainstream movie has ever before or since even attempted to do.
Yeah, it is really explicit, and I think that people kind of get hung up on the explicitness of it without realizing the broader cultural context. Like, one of the things that Jen had noticed is that the first scene starts with this gay guy getting killed, but the next scene after it isn't the cops reacting to it, it's the cops continuing to exploit transvestites. And it really shows that the cops aren't on their side, like, as of yet.
Yeah, I want to actually, that was my first reaction to the movie was that first scene with, it's two cops in a patrol car, and it's very interesting who they're played by. One of them is played by Mike Starr, who I'm sure listeners to the show will remember as the Irish guy from Goodfellas, who organizes one of their first Air France heists and then eventually ends up getting whacked by Robert De Niro. He's sort of the big, kind of like chunky Irish guy. He was in Dumb and Dumber. He's like a character actor that's very well known.
Was he also the guy that Steven Seagal fights in On Deadly Ground?
In On Deadly Ground.
Okay.
One of the oil riggers that Steven Seagal like teaches a lesson about being mean to Inuit peoples in On Deadly Ground. More important though is the other cop is played by the actor Joe Spinell, who is like the absolute king of like sleazy New York City 70s exploitation movies. He was in Maniac. He had an uncredited role in The Godfather. Google image search Joe Spinell, and like he just has the look of like sleazy New York. And he plays one of these cops, and then his character comes back in the movie in a number of interesting ways. But like this first scene you get of him is that these two guys in a radio car, they're like, I guess in the meatpacking district, when they see two transsexual or streetwalkers and then like begin to hassle them and be like, you're on my corner, you know what that means, like you got to pay a tax basically. And they get them in the patrol car, and it's like very strongly implied that they're going to extort sex out of these two streetwalkers. And then it's almost like the scene just ends, like nothing, it doesn't really go anywhere. It comes back later a little bit, but then it's just like you see the killer walk into one of these underground sex clubs, which is really kind of the centerpiece of the movie. It's a sort of kind of an excuse, like the police plot and the murder investigation. It's really all built around as an excuse to show several very lengthy scenes in these like underground gay sex clubs in 80s New York.
One of the things that I liked about the very first scene is that, and this can be a jumping off point for a whole diversion about the structure of horror films, is that the first scene does establish Cruising as a horror film, because you meet this really freewheeling, charismatic guy who then meets this enigmatic killer and then is murdered, and we never see this character again.
Yeah.
So it follows, I think, the format of every generic horror film, where it's like, this is what this film is going to be about, this is what happens, and so you kind of set that initial scare, and then the plot gets going.
Yeah, and that first victim is incredibly charismatic as well.
That guy has so much game.
He does.
Like, hey, where are you from?
Mars.
Oh, cool. I never made it with a Martian. Just like, it's always on.
Yeah, and he's also, it should be pointed out, a physical double for Pacino.
Yeah.
Which plays in later in the movie.
Sorry, just one more note about that first scene with the two cops who extort those sex workers. Like the first actual scene of like dialogue between them is the Joe Spinell character. They're both like just
Gross.
The look of these two cops is just like incredibly gross and sleazy.
yeah.
Like it sets the tone for the rest of the movie. But the thing that the Joe Spinell character is talking about, he's like, my wife, she took the kids to Florida to visit her sister, left a note, I'll get that bitch. And then his partner says of women, they're all scumbags. It's not worth it. And again, it's setting the tone for the movie that like women just don't exist in this film at all. Karen Allen plays Al Pacino's girlfriend, but like I said, she sets the tone for the movie in that she mostly doesn't matter and isn't a character at all.
Yes,
this is setting up a world that is exclusively masculine and masculine in like sort of the like I said, the seediest kind of nastiest way imaginable.
She's there to show that Pacino's character continues to not be gay.
Yeah. she's there as a signifier of his heterosexuality who gradually falls away as the film progresses. But yeah, it is very much
Pacino
about...
says there's something changing inside of me.
It is very much about masculine worlds of sexuality and violence.
And again, the interesting thing that I took away from that first scene is from the start where it's all pickup artist kind of bravado. Then there's a scene where he's tied up and the killer's got the knife out, and then you find that for all the bravado and all the masculinity, there's this vulnerable character with no sort of like recourse for the violence that's about to befall him, whether it's from the cops to kind of turn the other way, whether you want to make this a metaphor for AIDS or for homophobia. It's just like he's this masculine man who's also like suffering with no one to help him.
Yeah, because the movie actually takes time to develop these homosexual characters, so it isn't like
marginalized people,
because it's not I don't watching it, like I don't feel necessarily like these people are just caricatured, or stereotyped. Yes, they're a part of a reviled subculture, but they're also humanized, much as the roommate or the guy who lives next door to Pacino and is
the next door neighbor, the playwright.
Don Scardino, who's on a Mystery Science Theater episode, Squirm.
Yeah, he's Mitch.
Yes.
He's the antiquing Mitch from Squirm.
Oh, and I should point out, one of the trans sex workers, the one who eventually goes to the cops to try to complain, is played by Gene Davis, brother of Brad Davis. Gene was in 10 to Midnight, which we discussed on the show. He played a serial killer.
Oh, he's the crazy one.
And can I just say he looks fucking great in this
gorgeous.
Movie. Oh yeah, he's like actually stunning in his like skin tight leggings and heels with like the red lipstick. You can see why they picked him.
Right.
The thing that this movie does over and over again in like playing up the ambiguity about like who is the actual killer, and we'll get to that. But like Friedkin does a lot with this. There's a lot of gothic doubling going on in this movie. And the first time I saw it, I I couldn't tell the difference between killer and victim at a number of points in the movie. Yes. Where because in this leather subculture there is like a uniform. And the way it's contrasted with the police, I think, is also interesting. And this idea of like masculinity is just sort of about your identity is like the uniform you wear, and like you take off one and put on another. But like Friedkin is like at several points in the movie, like you see the killer and they're dressed in like a very certain way with the leather jacket and like the leather cap and like this kind of the uniform of this subculture. And then several scenes like after a murder will be committed, you'll see like sort of a wide shot of someone walking down the street wearing the same outfit, and then you'll realize it's just Pacino. Like it's this kind of like, at least I had a hard time like distinguishing between killer, victim, and main character at certain points in this movie that I thought was very deliberate.
Yeah, like there will literally, when he bellies up to the bar, like in several scenes, there's literally a guy next to him who looks exactly like him.
Yeah.
And who doesn't, playing in the movie, he's just a guy who looks like Pacino is at a leather bar.
And so like in the plot, like the setup is, right, like Paul Sorvino plays like the police detective, the police captain or whatever, who has to solve this serial murders that are going on of gay men.
Before the Democratic Convention comes to town.
Yeah, before the DNC, exactly. and his strategy to do this is to recruit like a young green officer played by Al Pacino who looks like the type of victim that this killer has been going after. So like he has the look of like height, build, dark hair, dark eyes. Pacino in the 80s, very handsome guy.
The littlest cop.
And just send him out into this world to be like an enticing bait for this killer. And you mentioned the scene where the trans sex worker comes back is Sorvino is interviewing her, and then like she gives information, and then she says like, hold on, I need to talk to you alone. And Sorvino takes her into his office, and she proceeds to tell him like, I need a favor. There are these two guys from the 6th precinct who are, really hassling me. They made me give them a blowjob in their car, really saying like these guys are bad, like they're no good. These are bad cops. I need you to do something with this other than like just file a complaint with IAD.
They're bad dudes.
Yeah, they're bad dudes. And Sorvino like completely dismisses this out of hand. He doesn't want to hear about it. And what he says to her is, how do you know they were cops? And she goes, because they were in a radio car in police uniforms. And he was like, well, what is their badge number? And she goes, I don't fucking know. Like, I didn't get a chance. And then Sorvino says, they're faking. He goes, there are more guys out there pretending to be cops than there are real cops, which is like such a bullshit lie.
Yeah.
But then there's a scene later in this movie at one of the sex clubs that takes place on precinct night, where it's just a massive club just filled with men all dressed as police officers because that's their hobby.
Yeah,
that's
filleting nightsticks.
Yeah, filleting billy clubs and stuff. And I was just like, oh wow, he was right. There were actually more people pretending to be cops than real cops.
Yeah.
That's why there was such a big crime wave,
This
you'd be running down the street going, officer, I've just been mugged, and they'd be like, no, I'm coming from a sex club right now. I'm not,
This is some
I'm not really
hilarious-
on duty.
That's
This is just my
dedication.
thing.
That's dedication, though, to get like a cruiser as well.
Yeah, exactly. You get a cop car to like force trans sex workers to suck you
Yeah,
off.
that would be really going
Yeah.
the whole length.
Really elaborate.
But no, this is a hilarious bit of trivia that I found while I was doing some research, and it kind of demonstrates how this movie has sort of grown in stature as the years have gone by, because maybe it's a little better understood. It's not so singular, and there's more of an understanding of queerness and queer culture, but this was pretty funny. This is from a book called Queer Images, A History of Gay and Lesbian Film in America, and it alludes to some... I think the consternation that the film created on its release, and here's one example. Other aspects of the film also caused confusion. For example, Time described Precinct Night at one of the leather clubs as a party for gay men who'd like to dress up as cops, while the New Yorker saw it as a party for actual cops who were gay. But can you imagine that reviewer like being so confused, like wait a minute, you mean there are all these gay cops going to these clubs? What?
Wow, I never believe it.
In uniform? I mean, that can't be NYPD regulation,
Right.
If you're off duty, you shouldn't be in uniform,
Well, it's like a police
Yeah, that's
convention.
very transgressive, yeah.
It's cops only, and it's like Comic-Con for cops.
Yeah, you don't blow some steam after like the regular convention and go out partying with your buds.
But it's funny because there was no ambiguity in my mind when I first watched this film as to what that is, because it's like, well, first of all, like, the leather subculture is not shocking to me. It's like, that's just called the typical Tuesday night at a lot of my friends' houses.
Right.
So... But,
and I mean, also, we came to this movie, like a decade or more after it came out. So
Exactly.
there's also hindsight and context.
Yeah, so it's like, I was like, oh yeah, Precinct Night.
Yeah.
It's like, it's dress up.
And thinking about it now, I think a lot of the controversy about the movie and the pickets and the anger from the gay community in 1980 New York, I think is probably due to the fact that this is coming at a time when the gay rights movement had made a lot of strides in sort of like making being gay or being open like a more acceptable mainstream thing for a certain kind of like middle class, well-to-do gay man. It was very important to maintain, to be like, well, I can be in the boardroom or whatever. And this movie really was just like all about like putting a microscope on an aspect of gay culture that perhaps these people did not want to be advertised.
Yeah, I could see
and
that.
There's even a part of the movie where like one of the murder victims is this like sort of very obviously wealthy boutique owner who, instead of going to the Hamptons, goes downtown to a pay-by-the-minute porno theater to just get picked up, basically.
And the first murder victim
Was a college professor.
Yeah, he's like a Boston professor.
Yeah, so it kind of tears the veil away from this outer respectability.
It's rubbing the presumably straight audience member's face in it, but it's also rubbing a lot of gay people's face in this movie, and how repeated and explicit, and how the camera lingers so much on these scenes of these men, and just everyone is dressed like Rob Halford, and they're just like dancing and grinding and doing poppers and fisting each other and blowing each other in like dank basements.
You couldn't even have men kissing each other on screen at the time, but it's like you'll see like bearded guys just fucking Frenching like right on camera. It's fucking great.
Big mustaches and leather caps, just full on making out.
It's something which is still very contentious in the queer community today, because you will still see people in the community saying, why do we have all these fucking freaks and weirdos at Pride? You know, I don't want to see that. Like, we don't need that.
Well, yeah, it does kind of cast them in a bad light of what's an already marginalized group. I can understand the protesting because it's saying, like, we're trying to be respectable here and you're making us look like horrible human beings.
I totally take that point from like a culture which is like marginalized. It's like, you know, we don't want to be painted as like these degenerates. But at the same time, I'm like, I like the idea of like queerness is like dangerous and flagrant, which is one reason why like I love this movie so much. Yeah, just fucking get that Crisco all over everything.
Well, I mean, it's got to go to that almost caricature extreme just to really, like Will says, kind of grind your face in it.
And again, like, I take the gay community's point at the time, because this was at a time when there were no or next to no depictions of gayness on the screen. The movie Making Love hadn't come out yet. That's a gay romance with Harry Hamlin, which was incredibly mild, but caused like a huge sensation because it was very frank about its romance. And Cruising also had the advantage of coming out like literally the year before AIDS became a thing, because in 1981 is when what was called at the time GRID, or gay-related immune disorder, because it was first noticed in a particular group of gay men. But then eventually it was called, I think to decrease the stigma, it was eventually called AIDS, or when they realized that it didn't just affect gay men.
It wasn't about being gay.
It just happened
wasn't
to be
about
in this
taking
population.
poppers.
Yeah, they did think that it was poppers at first.
You know, and actually watching this movie in hindsight with that knowledge and the fact that it came out in 1980 and depicted this world of 1980, like you said, just before AIDS happened, it really it takes on a more apocalyptic cast, this last moment of like just unbridled male sexuality of that era. As far as this depiction of these sex clubs and of the act of cruising for sex itself, I think it holds up as pretty accurate. The author Samuel Delany wrote a memoir called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue.
Oh, yeah.
That was all about his experiences just cruising the porn theaters of Times Square as a young man. And a lot of it does ring true, despite how sort of like nasty and exploitative the tone of the movie is.
I did like that quip where they're watching the film strip, and like they're showing the film, and just like, what is this, a Kenneth Anger film?
Yeah. Yeah, it does kind of look like they're watching fireworks, which is very arty. I also love, there are a few moments when the knife penetrates the flesh and you get a quick cut.
Yeah.
A penis penetrating an asshole.
Yep. That was like Friedkin going back to his Exorcist days of giving you just that quick cut flash of like the face, that demon face, except in this point it's a cock going in an ass.
Yeah. Pazuzu also fucks, by the way.
Well, he's got that snake dick.
Yeah.
And Friedkin I've actually seen him brag a few times about how explicit he got in the filming. Like, he says that he actually shot scenes of golden showers and stuff like that, which I assume they made him take out. It was probably a bridge too far at the time.
Yeah. Well, I do like that this kind of has in common with Alien, which I guess would have come out the year before, about that sort of anxiety of receptive. I forget where I read it, but yeah, just recently someone's had talked about how Alien is a metaphor for rape, but against men.
Yeah, and not to get too baby's first film crit class here, but traditionally in horror, like, victims are more often female, and you do get that knife penetration thing, and to see it turned onto the male body is very interesting.
There's a very Friday the 13th sort of there's a murder scene that takes place in the in Central Park, in the famous part of Central Park that really was a huge cruising scene in the 80s. And was it the Ramble in Central Park, and it was just like, wow, New York really has changed. Because I don't remember when it was just, if you go in Central Park, there's just like men just having sex in the bushes, like dozens and dozens of men having sex in the bushes. But that was a thing.
Fuck you, Giuliani.
That scene is sort of like getting lost in the woods is very like classic slasher movie kind of thing, except instead of like the last girl or the heterosexual couple that like goes off to have it away or whatever and then gets punished for their sexual transgression. In this, it's very much it's the male victim.
And yeah, it does have that horror movie vibe when the guy is wandering through the dark foliage and the killer is whispering this creepy nursery rhyme cadence to him.
And it fits with that 80s notion of like, don't go into Central Park after dark.
Right.
Yeah.
You may end up having sex with a man like that's just what happens in Central Park.
Purely by accident, quote unquote.
Another thought I had watching this movie is that like, okay, so when Pacino goes undercover, he like goes completely like off the book. Sorvino's the only one who knows his cover or whatever, and he moves down to Christopher Street, and he moves into an apartment. And in that scene, I just couldn't help but thinking that this is like consciously referencing Serpico, because it felt like the exact same scene in Serpico where he moves into the apartment in Greenwich Village.
Huh.
But this is like, only 7 years later, but it's like totally twisted and fucked up. And it's like the anti-Serpico. It's gay Serpico.
Yeah, it's fun, and it's funny because obviously Serpico was also about dirty cops, but this movie also takes a very dim view of the police.
It takes an even dimmer view of the police than Serpico does, which is really saying something.
Yeah, yeah, and more so.
The cops in Serpico were just dirty. They weren't like actual like rapists and just different mass murder of gay men.
Yeah, that's true. And there is so much bleakness to Cruising because when we discover at the end that Pacino's next door neighbor has been murdered, who's the cop who's taking down all the details about the murder? It's that dirty cop from the 6th precinct who forced the trans sex worker to blow him.
Another Hollywood homicide.
Yeah.
You also see that guy show up in one of the sex club underground scenes. He walks across the camera and like, oh no, you see him twice. He walks across the camera and looks directly at the camera, like you as the viewer are placed in the position of Pacino, and just sort of like moves by the screen. And then you see him again in the rambles, like in a cruising moment where Al Pacino is just like sort of posted up on, in a tunnel advertising, his goods or trying to catch an eye. So you see him twice in the movie before the end as not a cop, but like another member of this like underground gay community, basically.
Whoa, that's a good catch because I did not notice that, and I've seen this movie a couple times.
The only catch that I made is Powers Booth is the guy selling hankies. Yeah.
Oh, can we talk about that scene?
Yes.
I love that. I love this scene because it's just like apropos of nothing, and it has Powers Booth, R.I.P. by the way, R.I.P. to a great one, Powers Booth. But it's a Powers Booth cameo, and it's just like the scene is like apropos of nothing. Pacino is just sort of like testing the waters and trying to figure out this subculture of like hanky codes, and he goes into a shop on Christopher Street, and like Powers Booth is the proprietor, and he sort of just tips him to what the hanky code is, and he's like, a red bandana on a blowjob, and you give, it's on your right, and if you want one, it's on your left. Green is if you're a hustler, and then yellow is if you have golden showers, and it's like, but where you wear it is
giving or
whether
receiving.
you give or receive. Yeah. And like Pacino's just like, okay, thanks a lot, bye. It's just like, don't worry, you'll find what's right for you. And then in the next scene, Pacino is wearing the yellow bandana for golden showers, which is the weirdest one. Why did this character choose like the most extreme of the hanky code, and then immediately commits a faux pas by displaying this hanky code and then like not using it to its full extent.
That other guy gets very pissed off, as opposed to.
Yeah, because he just wasted his time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't wear that yellow hanky if you're not going to piss on me.
Yeah. Degenerate. Have some decorum.
Well, I guess we should just be lucky he didn't take a brown hanky.
Yeah.
I remember when I first learned about hanky code. It was in San Francisco.
Oh, I learned it from this, and I know that Peaches also did a song about it.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, but it was on like her 4th or 5th album. Getting back to, that dirty cop reappearing in a lot of the gay scenes as not a dirty exploitative cop, but as an actual participant, that reminds me of earlier scenes when it's Pacino out making the scene, and it's a lot of his POV shots of him out on the street. And the thing that you're noticing that if you're a straight man, you probably never notice, but if you're a gay man or a woman, you're more likely to notice is all the guys that are making eye contact with, like, more or less you, the viewer, because you're not seeing that sort of, like, intense stare of, like, hey, you, like, let's make a connection. Most of the time, if you're just a guy walking down the street, you're kind of avoiding each other, not looking anyone in the eye, but Pacino's kind of fresh meat in this situation, so there's a lot of that kind of uncomfortable eye contact.
Being sized up and kind of like judged and leered at. And the movie really does put you, the viewer, in that place, which is disconcerting from standard conventional movies.
It's interesting, like all the hookups that take place, they're set up with great speed and often with this like not quite covert swaggering aggression from both parties, which I find very, very interesting.
Yeah, you see a lot of that in the background, and I think in the in that film reel scene, there's some of that as well. Getting back to Paul Sorvino's character, giving him the assignment, he opens the conversation with Pacino saying, "Have you ever received a blowjob from a man?" And I gotta tell you, that's how I'm gonna start every conversation with a new person.
You ever get your pulse smoked by a man?
Okay, number one job interview tips for listeners out there. They are probably going to ask you, have you ever gotten your dick sucked by a man?
Yeah.
How you answer is very important. There's a number of strategies.
And when he shows up in later scenes, too, even when people leave and it's just him and another guy, I'm imagining him turning to him and saying, by the way, one more question.
like Columbo. One more thing. And also, what I like about the undercover cop setup of this movie is there's always the question throughout it is like, is the Pacino character, was he always gay? Did he always have sexual attraction to men and is very kind of like turned on by this world that he enters? I think it's pretty clear that he is. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to imagine if he was like closeted or like he didn't know how to deal with these feelings or felt it was wrong and was really trying to maintain a heterosexual relationship with Karen Allen, that he just lucks into like a situation where like the head of the NYPD, from the mayor on down, is like, listen, buddy, you better go in that leather club and suck some dick, okay? The city is relying on you, all right?
You have to be gay. Your city needs you.
You have to be gay. We're giving you permission, okay? This is the one opportunity. We're trying to find a killer here. You're doing God's work, okay?
And that must be so freeing.
Yeah, just Hellbent for leather, BDSM, just go hog wild.
And the funny thing with the Karen Allen, and one of like the only scenes with her, is that like when he first comes back to visit her, like after his like first foray into this world, he has like a leather bracelet on, and like he fucks her better than she ever has been before in their relationship. Really, goes for it. And she's like, oh, you're an animal. Like, she doesn't even say that, but it's like strongly implied. And then every other scene with her, he's like totally bored by her.
Also, who is that man's name you kept shouting out during sex?
Poor Karen Allen.
She's such a non-entity at all. Her character is a complete zero. There's no reason for her to be in this movie at all, but to like hold out this totem or avatar of heterosexuality. That's
I hate to say it, like Chalk This Movie Up is another one that's a favorite of mine, in which women are almost or entirely absent.
Well, I mean, think of like some of your favorite movies, like Lawrence of Arabia. I don't recall a single woman in that.
There aren't any women in
LA
Lawrence
Confidential,
of Arabia.
there's like one?
Yeah, like women figure in it, but it's definitely about a masculine world of cops.
Yeah.
And then Master and Commander. There aren't any women on that fucking ship.
Right, well, we know what Jen likes.
The only women in Master and Commander is in one scene where they're like in the Pacific Islands and like some ladies in big canoes like give them like fruit and a monkey. That's it.
Typical woman's role.
There's a moment where Russell Crowe looks longingly at her for a moment, then like shakes himself out of it, and it's back to rum sodomy and the lash.
he thinks about it for a second, and then goes straight back to thinking about the crown and thinking about king and country.
By the way, Aubrey and like Maturin, #1 ship, OTP.
But funnily though, all of those movies, Master and Commander, LA Confidential, and Lawrence of Arabia, are all very homoerotic. They're all about homosocial relationships and kind of a very low frequency of homosexuality in all of them.
Have you given no thought to them?
So yeah, I think we all know what turns my crank cinematically.
Yeah, pretty boys. There's also the popper scene, because also...
Oh God,
yeah.
we have to talk about this whole sequence.
So good.
Yeah.
So good.
And
The way he dances is just like so robotic and jerky. It's so good.
It's cute though because he's having such a good time.
It feels like he's both super repressed and trying to break out of his shell. I think that's what like the really frenetic dancing is. Like he isn't yet comfortable in his own skin in this situation.
Yeah, because the the amyl nitrate like kind of allows him to break free. And Tim, because you noticed it when we first watched the movie, and this is a favorite of yours. Can you talk a little bit about how that scene is set up in the cinematography?
I have to give myself a first-year film student gold star for noticing it. But it's the sort of thing that is obvious in hindsight. The very first shot of this scene is an American flag, and it is completely desaturated. It is a black and white picture of a flag. If that isn't completely obvious to you, it's the fact that as the scene goes on, there's kind of a blue cast throughout the whole scene, but as he's inhaling from this rag, the color suddenly becomes more vibrant. Yeah, it pops. It suddenly becomes more vibrant and more alive. You can see how through the use of color, he's saying Pacino is becoming more vibrant and more excited in this culture. Because without it, it's just this flat gray. And if you don't notice that from this thing is red, white, and blue, that is completely desaturated. How else can Friedkin put it right in your face?
I don't know how they did it. I would be curious to hear the process. If anybody knows about color timing, the way that when he smells the handkerchief and then the color just goes pa.
Yeah.
And it's suddenly saturated and bright, and there are flesh tones. Yeah. And then he's dancing.
Yeah, you really see it's bringing a lot of color into his world.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic color-wise in that you talk about Pacino coming back to Karen Allen. He's got the leather gauntlet and he's got all the accoutrements and whatever. In taking in this role, it's the abyss stares back.
Yeah.
This gaping goatsy abyss that he falls into.
Enter the void. Enter the goatsy.
It's funny that Karen Allen like never mentions to him like, "Hey, why are you suddenly dressing like you're in the Village People?"
Yeah.
Was the gay subculture of the time like that underground that it wasn't this immediate signifier that your boyfriend's actually into some Tom of Finland shit?
I think it would have been obvious to anyone of the era what was going on. Yeah. Slight digression about poppers. When me and the Chapo gang were in Pittsburgh, we were offered poppers basically like the second we stepped off the plane because I guess they're a fan of them and I'd never done them. So we were doing them in this bar and I think we almost got kicked out or we didn't realize it. But my friend Jacob Bacharach, who's been a guest on Chapo a couple times and lives in Pittsburgh, has now told me that he is banned for life from this bar that we went to because we were like huffing openly in this fucking bar.
Good times.
Yeah. See, this is like now it's the 21st century. It wasn't even a weird gay sex dungeon. It was just a regular bar, so they don't cotton to people huffing poppers.
Yeah, you can't go huffing in the Applebee's anymore. It's a shame.
Well, I did actually see someone arguing that, because eating ass has become such a trope online, especially on Twitter. I did see someone actually arguing that the straights have stolen eating ass from the gays.
That is true, and there is definitely an ass-eating scene in this movie.
Oh, yeah. Now,
there are probably several, to be honest, but there's one very explicit.
Yeah. On that one, I'm not Fanny Hill or anything, but I have been around the block, and I maintain that everybody loves getting their ass ate. Why must we reduce homosexuality to the anal, I ask of you?
Right.
It's so much more complex.
Maybe you invented it, but you don't own it.
Yeah.
This is
eating
for
ass is
everybody.
for everyone.
Yeah. There, put that on a t-shirt.
I will.
The next scene that I think we have to discuss is what takes place when they cotton on to like their first suspect, right? Yeah. And they do this whole sting where like he gets this guy to take him to a hotel room and tie him up, and then like half of the fucking Vice Squad kicks down the door with like shotguns to arrest them, and they take them back to the precinct and like put the heat lamps on them for the interrogation scene. They're working over, like, even though they know, or like Sorvino knows Pacino is his guy, the other cops don't, and they're giving him like the full working over just as they would any other suspect. And one of the cops, by the way, is Ed O'Neill. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Al Bundy.
Al Bundy.
Al Bundy does Ted Bundy.
And again, it's another one of these scenes in this movie that just happens and isn't explained. And oh my, like the Powers Booth thing, but even better. So while they're working them over, and like,
I want to talk to my lawyer.
Yeah, sweating them into this interrogation room. Out of nowhere, they just open the door to the interrogation room, and in walks a gigantic black guy wearing nothing but a jockstrap and a cowboy hat. And Pacino just looks completely confused, and then this guy just full on just slaps him out of his chair. And the character just goes, "What was that?
Who is that guy?"
It's like you're asking the same question in your head. What was that? Why did he hit me? And then he just leaves, and then Pacino, like they take him away. They're to like sweat the actual suspect, and they get him in the room with the other cops, and it's clear now that they're all on the same side. And he's like, "Hey, buddy, you hit me a little too hard." And he's just there reading a newspaper, but still just in a jockstrap. And it's just like the weirdest. It's the only time race is ever acknowledged in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's completely out of left field and totally bizarre. This is the NYPD's like real ace in the hole interrogation technique. It's just a black guy in a cowboy hat to smack you around.
Yeah, whenever you ask to talk to your lawyer, you're going to get backhanded by
a huge guy in a jockstrap and a cowboy hat. And I also love that Pacino is, you know, when he walks into that room where the guy's reading the paper, like he's recovered enough to say to him, like, "Hey, you know, you went like too hard on me," and then just grabs his hat and frisbees it out the window. Which to me implies like a certain friendly familiarity.
Yeah. It is a standout set piece in the film.
But yeah, like I've never truly understood that scene, and I don't feel like I need to.
I don't think it needs to be explained, though. I think it defies explanation. It's just in the movie, and it's just sort of like one of these beautiful moments in cinema that just doesn't need to be explained.
It stands on its own, yeah. Later, when they actually find what turns out to be the suspect, and Pacino's going through his letter to his dad, and you kind of find out more about his character, and then there's a scene of the suspect himself on a park bench talking to his dad, who I think we learn later turns out to be dead. But he's still carrying on this conversation with him and writing letters to his deceased father. And the thing that I find really interesting, that I believe is intentional, is that the father has the same dubbed voice as the killer in the murder scenes. That same "you made me do this." That's the voice of the father.
Really, I didn't notice that.
Oh.
That's how it came across to me, and I really love Friedkin's creepy use of dubbing, because he does the same thing for like the voice of Regan in Exorcist when she's possessed, where it's like, "What a nice day for an exorcism," like things like that. It isn't the actor's voice coming from the room; it's this voice just coming in directly to you, and it has this side of unnatural notion to it, where it's a normal human voice, but the context is all wrong.
This is an interesting production note. When the movie was actually being shot, gay activists tried to disrupt filming by making noise during takes. So it's probable that ADR was used so extensively in the film because a lot of the live audio tracks were ruined. But at the same time, like the detached quality that you get with ADR, like, actually works very well.
I could be making something out of nothing here, but I believe that use is deliberate.
I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe they would have ADR'd the killer's voice anyway, because it is very detached and weird.
Yeah. And similarly, if you want a more recent example of this, is Bane from the Batman movies. And because, his mouth is covered, you can't see him talking, so they really gotta, like, overdrive his voice so that it makes an impression. Otherwise, like, you just hear this muffled guy and you don't know what he's saying. I've talked to people who didn't get it, where they're just like, "Oh, they dubbed Bane all wrong. Like, his voice sounds all weird." And it's like, no, it's supposed to be coming directly at you. It's not like a voice in a room. It's much more powerful in saying, like, this voice is over everything. Like
Yeah.
there's all like this background noise, but no, the voice is the thing that's most important. And I think that Friedkin's doing this with the killer, and he's doing it with Pazuzu or Satan or whoever in The Exorcist, and that's definitely a trick that I want to steal.
Yeah.
You bring up sort of like the final act, or I guess like the last third of this movie, when Pacino, like they realize the first suspect they have is totally innocent, and they get on to the second suspect, who is a Columbia student who took a class with the murdered professor. So there is a connection between them. Now, in its portrayal of this character, and particularly the weird like daddy issues going on, I think is probably the part of the movie where I think the allegations of homophobia stick the most.
Okay.
In that I think the kind of like pop psychology of the movie is setting up gayness as being kind of like a psychological outgrowth of father issues. And like the scene where the killer or this character, he meets on the park bench with his dad, who we later find out is dead, and the dad is telling him, you know what you have to do. You have to do this for me. Like, he's killing these men to sort of like atone for his father's disapproval of him being gay or something like that, or this tyrannical kind of overbearing father figure that he's trying to reenact in some way psychologically or sexually. I found to be, let's say, problematic.
Yeah.
In its portrayal of homosexuality.
Yeah, because at the time, this was certainly way before there was any kind of consideration of a genetic component for homosexuality. This was before any notion of being gay is something that you simply are, at least to mainstream culture. I'm sure that there were many gay people at the time where it was like, hey, I've been this way since I was a kid. But this is before all the born this way kind of thing being in the mainstream. And people, I think, tended to look towards a psychological or Freudian psychoanalytic.
These Freudian, this kind of like Freudian version of like that homosexuality is some kind of like stunted or misplaced sexuality because of you were warped in childhood by an overbearing mother or father or something like that.
I came to a not a completely different conclusion in contrast to that, but just like a different one in terms of that the son's difficulty with coming to terms with who he is in disapproval of his father, and so that's how the "you made me do this" thing comes about, in that it's him enacting violence against his fellow gay men who he's attracted to, and he's saying, you made me do this, because it's like, how dare you bring this awful thing out of me, which is the same thing for Pacino, and for his character, because he delves into this world and then finds that he likes it, but it's in contrast to his own identity. So in that same way, he becomes this aggressor because he's killing these gay men, because it's like, you're bringing something out of me that I find deeply uncomfortable. That's kind of what I got out of it, is that he's killing the object of his desire.
Well, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about with this whole like very deliberate doubling effect throughout the entire movie, where like everyone kind of looks the same and you're not really clear who is a killer, who's a victim, who's the hero of the movie. And I think particularly like in, I guess, the climax of the movie, where Pacino follows this guy into the park and cruises him very aggressively, and like at this point he's like a pro and he knows exactly what to do. Like
Hips
he knows
or
all
lips.
the code,
Yeah.
he knows the look, he knows everything about it. And I think hips or lips, yeah, that's what he says. But then the scene like where like they take their pants off and then like the killer has his knife in the boot, but so does Pacino, and like Sorvino even shows him the murder weapon and gives him the exact same like steak knife this guy is using. And it's like, in that scene at the end, I'd have to rewatch it. Like, it's really not clear. Like, out of nowhere, Pacino just stabs this guy, but it's not clear who was making the first move, if it was self-defense, or if, in fact, the Pacino character has finally committed his own, like, gay panic hate crime.
yeah, in the same way that it continues on. Like, the killer isn't a singular person, the killer is the attitude. And Pacino then adopts it, and that's the reason that these killings are going to continue to go on. That's what I really like about this, following the structure of a horror film, is not just the first scene where the freewheeling person is killed, but then they think they solved it, but they haven't. There's the same unresolved psychological issue that is going to cause this to happen again, even though you killed the killer, but you didn't kill his motives.
Yeah, and then this leads into the very unnerving final shots
Yeah.
where Pacino stares directly into the camera, mirroring those direct, aggressive gazes that were directed towards him. And then what do we see? We see like a tugboat on the Hudson or whatever, which takes you back to the beginning of the film.
The very first shot of the movie is the tugboat. So he completes this kind of like Edgar Allan Poe sort of like sightless circle of violence in this kind of, it's a very gothic movie.
Yeah.
And the thing that happens before that is that there's another murder of Al Pacino's neighbor, who's the playwright character we haven't really talked about, but he's the one character who's like, he's a gay man, but he's not part of like the whole leather scene that Pacino is, and because of that, he's probably like more humanized and has more of a personality than a lot of the kind of like anonymous men in leather that you see in these sex clubs, and is sort of like the sweeter and more vulnerable than the rest of the men portrayed in this movie, and is ends up murdered at the very end of this movie, being very strongly implied that perhaps Al Pacino was the one who killed him.
Yeah, because Pacino had already gone to the apartment and almost got in an altercation, and did get in an altercation with
his roommate.
Roommate.
Right, yeah.
the dancer, who pulls a knife on him.
Played by James Remar.
James Remar, yeah.
And that's, again, like, if you want to separate it into like conscious and subconscious, like you say, he's kind of going underground into this seedy world of this explicit gay culture, but then to have the sort of nice guy in the next apartment, the one who's trying to be creative and living his life, like to then have that bubble up into like the daylight, because it's the only murder that's during the day. This seedy undercurrent then is again, like I said, bubbling up into normal everyday life, like like casual gays, like likable gays are getting killed now.
The acceptable ones.
Yeah.
Also, though, like the scene right before the very end where like Al Pacino's shaving and like looks in the mirror and like he meets your gaze in a very kind of weird way. Right before that, Karen Allen like discovers his like leather costume and puts it on.
Yeah.
And puts on the cap and the mirrored sunglasses and the leather jacket. And it's like, I was like, what's going on with that? Like, so Karen Allen is now taking on this identity of like, I don't know, like leather daddy or something.
She'll kill him in the sequel Cruising 2, and she'll become the next serial killer.
Right. And she's going to turn gay, and she'll be attracted to men. Wait.
She became a killer. She's killing gay men because her lover was turned gay by the NYPD in leather dungeon clubs, and she's taking out her revenge
I'd watch
on
that
the men
movie.
of New York.
No, it'll be she'll become a lesbian in the sequel, and the sequel will be Cruising 2: Daughters of Bilitis.
Right.
Yeah, I say let's make it.
Right.
Pure exploitation.
No, I like the notion of her killing gay men for stealing her boyfriend. One of the minor points that we hadn't talked about is the music in this.
Great soundtrack.
Yeah, the droning atmospheric.
Yeah, because there's a lot of like really gritty punk of the time, and then for kind of the horror scenes, there is this very creepy atmospheric synth drone, which put Tim in mind of Angelo Badalamenti.
Yeah, from Twin Peaks, or I mean, I knew it from Mulholland Drive, but all the same. It has kind of a great sense of atmosphere to it.
But I think my favorite soundtracks are always like creepy electronica, to be honest.
There's a lot to be had.
Yes.
One other point, no pun intended, is early on we're talking about how there's brief juxtaposition of penetrative gay sex while like the knife is entering the victim's body, and it just brought to mind Charles Bronson's insight from 10 to Midnight. His knife is his penis. So I guess now we need to reevaluate 10 to Midnight. He was on to something.
It's true, he was. Yeah. Again, also starring Gene Davis.
Yeah, well, a lot of the same names kind of keep coming up.
I have a question. There's a point where
I have a question. Have you ever gotten a blowjob from another man?
Well, I disqualify myself, but let me ask you two.
Right.
No, there's a point in the during the interrogation when they're trying to intimidate the first suspect, and one of the cops says to him, "We're gonna dip your balls in water and see if they float."
Yeah.
And I turned to Tim and I said, "Okay, I don't have balls. I'm gonna need this one explained to me."
I have no idea. Is it like witchcraft? Like if the witch floats, then
If they-
You know what that is? I think that was a direct. I think that was just like cop jargon, blarney nonsense where you just like fuck with someone and get in their head. And I think it was a direct line from "We're gonna put your balls in water and see if it floats" to Gene Hackman in Friedkin's French Connection. Did you ever pick your feet in Poughkeepsie?
Oh,
The Popeye does
yeah.
picking your feet in Poughkeepsie. It's just cops sort of like fast talking, fucking jive to just like fuck with people and just talk nonsense in a way that will just sort of like, throw you off.
yeah.
Oh, okay. That actually kind of makes sense because
I really love the French Connection as well. Mm-hmm. Like it really ruined police procedurals for me because everything else just seems so like fake and artificial and contrived.
yeah. Well, certainly most TV procedurals are very rote.
Yeah.
To answer your question, though, if you put your balls in water, they will not float unless your pole is being smoked by another man.
It's the 1-2 punch. Like they don't work on their own; they have to be in unison.
Yeah, this is like the NYPD's way to like test if you were gay or not.
Yeah, or like to see if you've like just blown your load, maybe.
I don't know.
Like, do your balls float if you've just like nutted?
Well, I know I feel much lighter.
Tim, get in the bathroom and tell me what you find out. Will, you do this too. We're gonna need
Is
more.
there,
We're gonna need a control
Mythbusters?
group.
Is there a Mythbusters podcast that we could submit this to?
It's all Mythbusters and it's all like testicular myths.
Yeah. Myth bust a nut. I don't know.
Yeah, I am myth busting over here.
So, having picked Cruising apart, like, how do you guys think it ultimately comes off as, a great freaking joint or something homophobic that should be reviled or something in between?
Yeah, I would say something in between. Like, I don't think it's as bad a movie as like the initial critical reception would have it be. I think it's definitely worth seeing. Mm-hmm. I think it's like an interesting because I think it embodies like a lot of these things, like in that it like an interesting artifact of like peak like New York City kind of like sleaze exploitation cinema, but also like interesting because of the way I think, as you said at the beginning, the frankness with which it portrayed this subculture that hasn't really been attempted before or since.
I really like Friedkin's approach to horror because I find this and The Exorcist, just both being really good horror movies, and I think that it's certainly a style to emulate, and I think that Cruising does follow this horror blueprint. But the problem is I think that a lot of horror movies now are lacking in that sort of grounded nature that even The Exorcist or Cruising has, in that they exist in a dynamic and nuanced real world. Because even in The Exorcist, like there are links of like archaeologists looking for artifacts, and like this has nothing to do with like the scary bit, but it's all setting up like this realistic world and this sort of atmosphere that I think is missing from a lot of modern horror. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about Cruising.
Yeah, I know. I like what you said about Friedkin and horror, because like I said, like I'm seeing it again. I was very struck by the kind of gothic overtones of this movie, both in its use of kind of like doppelgangers, but also like the general feel of the movie. I mean, it's like, it is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous movie on a lot of levels, for sure. But it's an interesting one, and I think worth seeing. By the way, Friedkin horror movies. You guys ever seen Bug?
I want to.
I have never.
That movie looks off the
That was
chain.
one of the fucking scariest movies I've ever seen.
Wow.
Without a, do you guys know anything about it?
I know nothing about
Yeah,
it.
it's the one. It's Ashley
You guys
Judd.
gotta have me on to talk Bug. It's based on a Tracy Letts play, and it stars Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon in his first like big role. And it's just like it because it's based on a play. It's like very self-contained. There's like almost one set, and it's just basically two people in a motel room losing their fucking minds, and it is so fucking scary and disturbing. So definitely worth seeing if you haven't seen Bug. One of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen.
Oh, that's great.
Nice. Halloween episode. Yeah, for me, as someone cruising, like, I love it. I recommend it. Again, Will, you and I talked about this on the Scorsese episode. I love movies about masculine spheres which are completely closed to me, a woman. This allows me a peek not just at a masculine world, but one, not to say that people don't still cruise and go to leather bars, but of a disappeared New York.
That's the other interesting thing is like this portrayal of a lost New York and like a lost like gay culture now, because like cruising, it's just all on like it's all online.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's been removed from this kind of like this public kind of display of transgression and sort of codes and uniforms, and I assume has largely been displaced by the internet. And now it's just like it's just all online.
Yeah, there's just a yellow hanky subreddit now.
Yeah.
r/Eurolagnia.
Yeah.
Also, the actual New York City locations in this movie were actually also very good and accurate.
Speaking as a New Yorker.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah, we're entirely West Coast, so.
Yeah, I've been in New York like twice.
So, is there anything else we want to say about cruising?
Don't turn gay and start murdering gay people. It might be a little much for you.
I would just like to say, poppers can be enjoyed by non-gay people. You don't
Enjoy them responsibly.
have to do them just so you're, get fully dilated and can be fisted. But, they can be enjoyed responsibly in a good, wholesome context.
All right, well,
then everyone loves ass play.
Eating ass is for everyone. I love cruising. Go watch it. Next episode will be Larry Kramer's faggots.
I've met Larry Kramer, actually.